Pietro Maximoff. They were introduced into the MCU via everyone's least favorite Avengers movie, in a time when nobody could say the word mutant. At least Wanda got to stick around and establish herself as one of the mightiest characters, while Pietro was gone before we really got a chance to know him. I mean, he did go out in a heroic act of self-sacrifice, but he's gone nonetheless. Did the fastest character in the MCU really have to have the quickest conclusion to his storyline too? But most Marvel fans don't know that Quicksilver almost had a much longer career in the MCU. There isn't just a deleted scene, but an entire alternate ending for Age of Ultron. Major plot points like the creation of Vision and destruction of Ultron still stand, but the big difference here is that Quicksilver survives. Apparently, writing this character out of the franchise wasn't the plan from the onset. There were actually multiple scenes showing him alive and well after taking bullets meant for Hawkeye and a child. According to director Joss Whedon, he recorded a final scene showing Quicksilver all decked out in his costume, alongside his sister. The loss of Quicksilver was a sad moment for fans, but if you follow Whedon's work, you probably guess that he just had to throw in at least one tragic and seemingly meaningless loss of life at some point. He claimed that he wanted Age of Ultron to showcase the harsh realities of war, and that meant that somebody had to lose their life. Since Quicksilver was perhaps more arrogant and difficult to get along with than Tony Stark, he had to be the one to go. That happened quite some time ago, but since we can finally have authentic mutants in the MCU, now I can't help but wish Quicksilver was around for some of my favorite X-Men storylines from the comic books. Of course, we all know the big bombshell of Captain Marvel is that the Skrull aren't an inherently evil race of shape-shifting aliens. They're a regular group of shape-shifting aliens trying desperately to find a home and escape persecution by the Kree Empire. Even though the movie started out with Carol Danvers living among the Kree, we didn't have much of a chance to explore their world. But one deleted scene would have given us an all-new look at the Supreme Intelligence. This form of artificial intelligence takes on a different form depending on who is looking at it. When Carol looked upon it, she saw her former mentor Mar-Vell looking back at her, although she didn't recognize her at the time. Clearly, whichever form the Supreme Intelligence takes tells the audience something about whoever is looking at it. So what would it tell us about the insidious Yon Rogg? Well, we almost found out. We never saw them come face to face in the theatrical release, but a deleted scene revealed who Yon Rogg admires most: himself. You might have noticed over the course of the movie that Yon Rogg isn't exactly the nicest guy in the galaxy. In fact, he's a downright narcissist, so it makes sense that when he encounters the Supreme Intelligence, he sees himself looking back. Including this scene in the movie would have really driven home just how highly this character thinks of himself. It would have also shown him getting beaten down, at least verbally, by someone other than Captain Marvel. This could have contributed to Yon Rogg coming across as a more complex character instead of a one-dimensional intergalactic bully. Captain Marvel may have the power to punch a spaceship apart, but she still had a tough time making her way into the MCU. Yet we almost saw her way sooner than most people realize. Her entry wasn't delayed because of her lack of skills, or the fact that she clearly had to search the universe to find that perfect hairstylist. She had the misfortune of making her movie debut right before the release of Avengers Endgame, a movie which had been built up for years. So Disney had to take a major risk with how much to include her in Endgame. If her standalone film was a flop, then her pervasive presence in Endgame wouldn't go over well. But we also saw Captain Marvel show up in the MCU way before the decimation took place, and Nick Fury summoned her back to planet Earth. Even though Avengers Age of Ultron came out way earlier, Disney was already looking for an actress to take on the role of Carol Danvers. There were reports that she would end up joining the Avengers by the end of the movie, but as we all know, that wasn't the case. While the Avengers did add some new talent to their roster, Carol was nowhere to be seen. But an alternate scene showed that wasn't always the plan. Captain Marvel almost made her first MCU appearance all the way back in Age of Ultron. She was going to appear at the end of the film when the new Avengers lineup was revealed, but this didn't happen. Apparently, director Joss Whedon loved the idea of surprising the audience with a Captain Marvel cameo, but he was thwarted by Marvel Studios head Kevin Feige. He didn't want to introduce a major character by just having her pop up at the end of the movie. Instead, Captain Marvel was introduced years later in her very own standalone film. Not only would we have met her sooner, but she would have been around for major movie events like Civil War and Infinity War. Having old spaceship fists on one side or another could have definitely changed the outcome of Civil War. Most of us like to imagine we could share some traits with our favorite heroes, but I'm more of a J. Jonah Jameson myself, constantly slamming my fists on my desk demanding more Spider-Man. So as far as I'm concerned, the more Spider-Man, the better. And considering what a hit Into the Spider-Verse was, I can't be the only one who feels that way. In the MCU, we have Peter Parker in the role of everyone's favorite friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but in the comics, there's a ton of other creepy crawly characters. One of those web-slingers is Miles Morales, who takes over as Spider-Man after the Peter Parker of his universe loses his life. There was already a pretty big Easter egg in the movie Spider-Man Homecoming involving Miles. We saw Peter confront a man named Aaron Davis, who was trying to buy some of the weapons created by Vulture and his crew. Although he was reluctant to talk at first, he relented due to the fact that he has a nephew who lives in the neighborhood. Comic book fans know that Aaron Davis is a criminal known as the Prowler, as well as the uncle of Miles Morales. And a deleted Homecoming scene would have made this even more obvious. We saw Peter leave Aaron stuck to his own car, even though he had ice cream in it that would surely melt. I don't need my comic counterpart J. Jonah Jameson to tell me Spider-Man is really a monster after I saw that. In the deleted scene, Aaron calls his nephew to let him know that he's in a sticky situation and addresses him as Miles. If this scene made it into the final cut, it would have proved that Miles Morales is out there somewhere in the same timeline as the rest of our MCU heroes. Despite having probably the most forgettable standalone film in the MCU, The Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner have had quite the story arcs over the years. We've seen Bruce try desperately to prevent the Hulk from taking over, and in Thor Ragnarok, we learned that the Hulk wasn't any happier about the situation. Bruce called out Hulk when it was time to defend Asgard, but after taking a direct hit from the Mad Titan, he decided to make a strategic retreat. Many fans were disappointed that we didn't get to see the Hulk go on a rampage during Infinity War, especially since the trailer indicated it would happen. But this may have been less of an intentional bit of misdirection and have more to do with a change of plans. Originally, Bruce was going to transform into the Hulk during the Battle of Wakanda, but not like what we saw in the trailer. Instead, we were going to get the smart Hulk we saw during Endgame. This deleted scene would have shown Bruce and the Hulk having a heart-to-heart and agreeing to merge into one being in order to defeat Black Order member Cull Obsidian. Bruce and Hulk may disagree on a lot of things, but they clearly agree on their dislike for their situation and their desire to smash things into a pulp. This would have meant that this massive transformation wouldn't have happened entirely off-screen like it did during Endgame. It would have given viewers more insight into these characters and their relationship with one another. Basically, it would have made the transition to Smart Hulk easier to accept instead of just having him show up as the most popular hero in his peer group. Actress Katherine Langford is known for her work on the show 13 Reasons Why, but fans were left wanting to know one good reason why she didn't show up in Avengers Endgame. We all knew she was cast in the movie, but not what her role would be. But if you were left wondering where she was, the answer is that her scene ended up on the cutting room floor. Langford was cast as an older version of Tony Stark's daughter, Morgan, who we saw as a little girl in Endgame. Seriously, could she have been any cuter? If you can hear the words "I love you 3000" without tearing up, well, I'm not saying you're heartless, but you might be kept alive by some sort of arc reactor or something. As if little Morgan losing her father wasn't tragic enough, Disney originally wanted to drive home the point even more by having Tony encounter his daughter all grown up. No, this didn't have anything to do with the time travel we saw everyone using during the film. This would have happened after Tony used the Infinity Stones to defeat Thanos and his army. While Thanos met his adult daughter Gamora there as a small child, Tony would have met his small child as an adult. In the deleted scene, Morgan told Tony how proud she was of him, and the two were able to get closure on their relationship. Ultimately, this scene was left out because the Russo brothers felt it was too similar to Tony's hologram delivering his own eulogy. It also would have added an unnecessary ending to a movie that already had a lot going on. I mean, the movie was called Endgame, but apparently too many endings would have been a bad thing. Finding out the Skrulls weren't the villains of Captain Marvel was pretty surprising, but it wasn't as weird as seeing a time when Nick Fury knew about as much as Jon Snow. He's known for being one step ahead of our heroes most of the time, and was dedicated to sussing out superhumans for his Avengers initiative. Even though said initiative didn't exactly go the way he had hoped, he gathered a lot of intel about what was going on in the MCU. And all the way back in Iron Man, he very nearly dropped some hints about major characters existing in the universe. The scene where Tony Stark and Nick Fury discussed the Avengers initiative nearly went very differently. In a deleted scene, Fury mentioned gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites, and assorted mutants. The gamma accident line is an obvious nod to the Incredible Hulk, who was created by an unhealthy amount of gamma radiation and the inner rage of Bruce Banner. Those other scenarios might have been less obvious, but they were also things that weren't even allowed in the MCU at the time. Radioactive spider bites could refer to a lot of spider characters, but it was almost certainly a nod to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. The major problem with that was that at this time, Sony owned the movie rights and weren't interested in sharing them. The assorted mutants could have described the X-Men, although their movie rights belonged to Fox at the time. Back then, mutants was pretty much a banned word in the MCU, so for obvious reasons, this scene did not make it into the film. But come on! How exciting would it have been to get a hint that we could be seeing Spider-Man and the X-Men join the MCU all the way back in the first Iron Man movie? We all know the quantum realm holds the secrets of time travel, but we know remarkably... Okay, so this one isn't an entire deleted scene, but if it played out, it would have had a massive impact on the MCU. This piece of Avengers Endgame concept art shows Nick Fury being impaled by Corvus Glaive, and I have a feeling he wouldn't be able to walk off this injury. This scene would have had to take place after the decimation was undone and both Corvus Glaive and Nick Fury returned to Earth. But the major question here is, are we seeing the real Nick Fury? Spider-Man Far From Home revealed that the Skrull Talos was masquerading as Nick Fury while the real former S.H.I.E.L.D. director was chilling in outer space. Of course, we want to know what he and the Skrulls are up to, but I'm also curious about how long Talos has been impersonating Fury. Was it really Talos who paged Captain Marvel during Infinity War? Was it fake Fury who was seen at the funeral of Tony Stark? It's possible that this concept art isn't showing Corvus Glaive taking out Fury at all, but the Skrull Talos simply disguised as him. This would definitely have an impact on whatever the Skrulls are up to. It would also have exposed the fact that Talos was disguised as Fury prior to Far From Home, and have clued our heroes into what's going on. Because even though we know Talos is on Earth disguised as Nick Fury, we haven't seen any evidence that people in the MCU know what's going on. Is Captain Marvel aware that two of her friends have done a switcheroo, or is even she out of the loop? This deleted scene from Avengers Endgame would have been incredibly powerful, but that's exactly why it ended up getting cut out. We all know that Tony Stark made the ultimate sacrifice by using the Infinity Stones to defeat Thanos and his army. Watching him say goodbye to his wife Pepper Potts and protege Peter Parker was absolutely heartbreaking, but it was almost even sadder. In this deleted scene, Clint Barton takes a knee, seemingly in reverence of Tony's sacrifice. Then all the other characters do the same, kneeling before Tony Stark to pay their respects. Well, with one exception. The sole person who doesn't take a knee is Gamora, who simply walks off into the distance instead. Although it may seem cold, remember that this isn't the same Gamora we saw learn to loosen up through her relationships with her fellow Guardians of the Galaxy. She has no connection with any of these people, except for her sister Nebula, and isn't even from the same year. Still, this scene would have confirmed that she survived the battle and hinted that she didn't seem interested in sticking around. The Russo brothers admitted that the scene would have been emotional, but they felt that it was too similar to the scene at Tony's funeral. They decided it would be redundant to keep both moments in the movie, so they ended up cutting this one. This scene might have been moving, but I can kind of see their point. Did we really need any more